You're listening to Go Back and Get It, a Sankofa audio journey. This is episode 1. Why Sankofa?
Is it okay that I don't like coffee? My wife started drinking it 20 years into her marriage, and I'm not sure I trust her anymore.
And there's nothing better than that. You just got to find the way that you like it.
That's right. That's right.
Some people like it black. Some people like it with cream. Some people like it with lots of cream, like me.
Chocolate.
And sugar. So a good cup of coffee is what's good to you.
Okay. Well, there you go. Watching my dad grew up, it was a taster's choice and a cup in the microwave straight. Well, thanks for coming out again. It's good to see you guys. We've had occasions to run into each other here and there along the way. I'm looking forward to the trip. I think this is a very unique trip in that we have folks that are educators, pastors, leaders, ministry folks, people that have just invested already in this work. And sometimes when we do the trip, there's folks that are like on page 1, and these folks are not on page 1. They're more like chapter 5 or so, in different places for sure, in different contexts. But I think it's pretty exciting, though, to see how the Lord will use our time together. Char, this is your third trip. Why did you say yes again?
So I say no to you. That's the first thing.
Bless you.
But the last two times I went, my first one was just a very, it was a very diverse group. And like you said, a lot of those people were on page 1, just had no idea. And some of the, we would leave some of the exhibits and they were just speechless and had no idea. And then I went a couple of years ago, a year and a half ago, on an all women Sankofa, where you were you were the only male, and it was a different vibe, as you said, and so and I think each group is different the way the Lord puts it together. And so this one, I was interested because when we first told me about it, you said this is a pastor's Sankofa, and so I have a ministry to pastors. I have a love for pastors. And so I thought, well, because we kind of explored the idea of kind of channeling it to certain groups. Because the last time I was on, we talked and we said, what if we had an actor Sankofa or a lawyer Sankofa we talked about a pastor's, but just to different facets, segments of society. And when all those people could go back and expose their industry to this. I just thought it was a great, it's an idea to explore. So this, I think, is maybe the closest thing that we come to it. I don't know, but it's going to be very interesting to see how these folks interact, especially with the theological background they have and the foundation they have scripturally. It's going to be really interesting. And that's one of the things that interested me so much when you first told me about it.
I'm doing one for retired teachers in Nebraska. So that will be interesting. I think educators would be a neat trip too, which some of the folks on this trip are educators, including Dr. Michael Emerson here. What possessed you to say yes in the midst of teaching and terms and all the things going on? And
well, when you obviously approached me and Glenn Bracey and said, what do you think about this possibility? I thought it was very intriguing because we just came from a dinner with 10 of us, right? And one of the participants on the way back was saying we probably exchanged more stories among the 10 of us in that hour and a half that we sat at a table than we probably have with other people in the last month or something like that. And it's true. We have so little time in our lives anymore to do that. The power of being with people. And what really intrigued me was what you just talked about, the idea that these are people in chapter 5. And can we get to chapter 7?
I'm not sure I even know the origins of your passion for break show reconciliation, racial justice, racial harmony, racial healing. I'm not sure, people use different terminology with different emphasis for different reasons, and I think they're all good terms, but I don't know if you have a term that you associate with this or all of the above, but what stirred this in you from way back when? Because you've been at this a while.
Yep. Definitely got a story. I always say I was central casting white guy, just total stereotypical upper Midwest guy. When I got my first professor job, we were in the whitest metropolitan area of the United States at that time, St. Cloud, Minnesota, and didn't want to live in the city that's a little too edgy, so had to go out to a suburb.
Gotcha.
Yeah, raising the kids, going to put up the white picket fence, and I got invited to something called Promise Keepers, which was going to be out in Colorado. And some guys from our church were going. So went out there and had I call the Acts 2 moment. Maybe we'll share this with participants later. But in the Promise Keepers, the way they organize it, there's 7 promises, and I would have a speaker say, how to be a better father, how to be a better community member, whatever. And then you're supposed to, after that talk, write down what it is you heard God say. And if they were telling you how to be a better husband, what my hand was doing was, race in America grieves me. Every time, no matter what they talked about, my hand would just write something about race. And we're talking about race. One of the promises is, but that came later. It was the weirdest feeling. So I got a distinct idea God was trying to say something. Bought any books that existed at a tent on race and faith and read them all on the way back. It was an 800-mile trip back. And then went to sleep, and I had my only true vision ever, and it was clear as day. And this is what God said: You and your family will live as the racial minority till I tell you otherwise. 30 years has to do that, and it's utter transformation, and that opened our eyes in ways that we could never have known otherwise.
That's powerful. So, Breaking Down the Walls, Raleigh, Washington, and Glen Creek.
That was the very first one I read. Yeah.
I was in Colorado.
Were you?
I was.
Yeah. Small world.
Yeah. And I know Promise Keepers kind of, people retrospectively, look at that and have some different critiques of their approach to racial reconciliation.
Yes.
That maybe it was just stepping into the waters, but it didn't have the depth to it that it needed, which that totally makes sense. But I will say, for me, it was also a spark.
Yes.
That I was like, somebody's starting to think about this stuff in the church. And I was coming to faith. I was just bewildered, having come out of university north of Detroit. I went to Oakland University, very diverse. I grew up in rural Michigan, which was not diverse, but my whole college experience was. And so now I'm in this large metropolitan area in Minneapolis, going to this church of over 1,000 people, and there's almost no people of color. And I was like, how can 1,000 people be getting together in one place where love your neighbor is the greatest practical outward expression, and it's just not diverse at all? And that just started unfolding for me, years and years of probing, why is that? What is going on?
It cannot happen by random chance.
Yeah.
You cannot roll heads 1,000 times.
Not going to happen. Right. Yeah. Yeah. How about for you, Shar, as an African-American woman coming to this subject matter and experiences in life that you've had along the way?
Mm-hmm.
What propels you to continue to invest in this kind of work?
Well, it is the narrative of my life. I think really for me, I was one of those kids who was bused to an all-white school. I was raised by parents who went through Jim Crow. So on my mom's side, there are 10 siblings. On my dad's side, 11 siblings. And they all have stories. And so, you hear these stories along, through the decades or whatever. But it wasn't until I started working at my current job where somehow became my responsibility to put on Black History programs each year for several years. So in order to prepare, I would have to do research and make sure that what I was stating in the programs was correct. And so I thought I knew a lot about Black history, but I learned a whole lot more. And so it just became a passion of mine to make sure the next generation knows this. So it's a history, and I love the title Sankofa because it means go back and get it. Don't leave your history. Don't forget it, because it makes us who we are. It is our past, but it past has brought us to today. And so that is, and who we are today is a stronger version of who we were, because you think about, and I think about African Americans like this. This is just me thinking. Our ancestors came here on slave ships, and so for 2 or 3 centuries we went through that. Then we went through the restructuring, the Reconstruction period, then the Jim Crow season, and then the Civil Rights season, and then on. And so all of the generations that have survived all of that now have become the strongest version of who we are as a people. You think about a bacteria that goes through all these different strains, and it continues to grow and grow and grow. And then after a while, it can't be beat. It can't be stopped, because it's the strongest version of itself. And so I look at African Americans like that, where we have become a different breed of people. We're a different people. We're our own culture. There's nobody else like us anywhere. We came from Africa, but we're no longer Africans. We have African descent, but we have become our own race in this country.
Yeah, that's a great way to think about it.
Yeah. I think that importance of history is really foundational, and the idea of Sankofa, go back and get it. A big part of it is so we can gain the wisdom from the past of how to move forward. Not only does it just not explain, or explains kind of where we are, why we are the way we are, but it also, you see places where movement happened, changed happened. What were the elements and the dynamics that pushed something beyond what seemed impenetrable at the time, or what seemed impossible to overcome, and yet it wasn't. But then we also, on the trip, one of the things I always tell people is listen for echoes, because some of the things that you will hear today and are being touted come out in rhetoric in different ways, shapes, and forms, sound very eerily similar to the things that we hear on some of the videos that we watch, for instance, along the way, or some of the signs that you read, or some of the attitudes. Boy, that sounds strangely familiar. Our past is behind us, but it's still connected with the present, and it's connected with the future. It's kind of like one continuum that changes, as you said, along the way, strengthens or it can weaken too, I suppose, but they're never really disconnected. They're kind of together. So sociologically, it seems like you're a sociologist. Is that right?
Absolutely right. If you just think about your own life, right? You're not 5 anymore, but there's no way you could argue that it did what happened when you were 5 doesn't matter. Of course it does. Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah. The civil rights movement, which is mostly what we're going to be able to see in the trip, is such a powerful time in the U.S. history that people in my profession that study social movements, that is the ultimate one. You have marginalized people who are banned by law and all kinds of, and somehow able to transform a nation. It doesn't even logically make sense that you could do it, and yet it was done. So to understand how it happened is so important for the future.
Yeah, I've heard the civil rights described as making America be America for everyone.
Absolutely. Live up to the promise that you say in the very words you have written.
Yeah, that when you say that, it reminds me of Dr. Perkins, who recently passed March 13th, who was a forebearer in the work of racial harmony in the church, holding grace and truth together in such meaningful and profound ways, and lived it with his whole life, imperfectly, wonderfully. But I remember him saying, these truths we consider to be self-evident. All men are created equal. And he said, and then he goes, with his claw finger, but while the ink was still drying, then came the rest of it that, counted enslaved people as 3/5 of American for purposes of house seats and taxes and representation, and describing the Native Americans as merciless savages was the description.
It's right there in the Constitution.
And so, from the beginning, our nation has just wrestled with this ideal, this hopeful ideal. It is a beautiful expression that's really true, resonates with the depths of Scripture, being created in God's image. And again, as Dr. Perkins says, we don't give people dignity; we just affirm it. God is the one that gave it, and that's kind of there. And yet, the rest of it, so much of dignity was taken away and reduced, and that set us up for a course of history that has been painful, difficult, brutal, destructive. And in the midst of it, like we said in the civil rights movement, there's some beauty that came together of when people unite for a common purpose. It's a really, really powerful thing.
To add, I think it gives people in my profession who are pretty secular real consternation is it's the power of the church, right? Especially the Black church, but in the civil rights movement, you cannot ignore the fact that faith was the driver.
Absolutely. So it was interesting you said about, because when you talk about what's written on paper and then what's actually lived out. And I remember the words of Dr. Martin Luther King where he said something about, he believes one day that America will finally live out the true meaning of its creed. And so the creed is what we read, is what's written and we recite it.
Yeah.
But it was never really lived out. It was just spoken. It was written and it was there. Just like, the 13th Amendment is there and the 14th Amendment is there. But if the laws are not enforced and nobody obeys it, then it's just there. It's just written on paper, but it's not functional in our society for the people it was written for. So, and so that's why that's why these eruptions continue to happen in our society. And then it'll die down. It's like a volcano. It'll erupt and explode and do a lot of damage, and then it'll calm down for years. And the pressure builds up again, and then it'll erupt, And so people in society say, well, why does this keep happening? Well, because you can't put a Band-Aid on a cancer.
Yeah.
Cancer has to be cut out. So you need surgery, you need chemotherapy, you need radiation. You're not going to put a Band-Aid there and just leave it and cover it up and think it's going to go away. It's not.
Yeah, and I think to that point, the church has gone into particularly when it's a dominantly white church, reactive mode. So there's when something happens, which it inevitably does and will again, and ignites a sociological conundrum of people wrestling with this issue. And then there's this kind of rush and a surge to, hey, let's talk about it. Let's have a guest preacher. I've known pastors like, I got 20 calls this week of people come preach at my church. And then it subsides and then you don't hear from anybody. Mm-hmm. And so my heart has always been, we need to create something that is sustaining, engaging, involves discipleship, so that when these things happen, we're people that can walk through this process without becoming dismissive, divisive, destructive, harmful to each other in a lot of ways. Yeah, and Minneapolis, where I'm from, there's no shortage. We've been kind of the headwaters, like we're the headwaters of the Mississippi. It's been the headwaters of racial justice and tension and tragedy for a decade or more. We've been in it. So it's I think it behooves us. It behooves the church to consider, how is this a part of our discipleship? What do we do, like we do in so many other areas of life that we've been affected by? Your marriage was affected by how you were raised as a kid and your family. Somehow we get the idea that racialized history, we're exempt from the effects of that, but we're not. None of us are.
We're not. No.
And we all need healing. We all need discipleship. We all need to be shaped into kingdom form in our hearts and our minds and our will. That's a big part of the trip I'm looking forward to. I think it helps people not just know about things intellectually, but actually feel the weight of and the pervasiveness of some of that history and our experiences.
That's one of the things I love about this trip, because it's so educational, but it's like scripture. Scripture, God doesn't hide the bad parts.
Yeah.
You know, the good, the bad, the ugly, the brutal, the nasty, but in that way, it reminds me of Sankofa, this trip, because some parts of it are really heavy. And we warn the people, you know, that today's going to be a heavy day because we know the weight of what they're going to see is going to stay with them. But we have help them unpack it. But I think it's good for them because when you don't know, you don't know, you know, and so we can, you know, we can stay in our bubbles and protect ourselves when we don't know. Because we can say, oh, I'm sure it wasn't that bad. I'm sure it was. But when you actually see it, and you can imagine, and you are almost like yourself experiencing what these people felt, it stays with you. And so now the bubble is burst, and now we live with those thoughts. We sit with that for a while, and it's good. It's a good awakening.
This week we're revisiting history, and we'll kind of end with this. I think sometimes people think that that's revisionist history. Revisiting history is not the same as revisionist history. It's actually going back and holistically looking at it. Just like we are fortunate to have the book of Exodus, we have the description of what it was like for the Jews to come out of enslavement of Pharaoh. If Pharaoh had written that book, we'd have a much different story. And so God blessed us with the story of the Exodus so we could see what it was like. And that's a little bit of what this trip is like, seeing what it was like coming through and coming out and overcoming some things from our past and getting it from that perspective versus the glossed over or otherwise narrative way of telling the story. So I'm looking forward to being with you guys this week. I think it's going to be wonderful. Thanks for saying yes. Thanks for sacrificing to be here away from family and time and work and all kinds of things. Thank you. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it. Go Back and Get It is a production of Catalyst for Harmony. To learn more about Sankofa or to join a future pilgrimage, visit catalystforharmony.org. Thank you for listening.